Back in this thing. Okay. So I read a little page out of my book. Today, I believe it's March 3rd. It's Cultivate the Craftsman's Ethic. Let's see. The great masters, including contemporary ones, all managed to retain the craftsman's spirit. What motivates them is not money, fame, or high position, but making the perfect work of art, designing the best building, discovering some new scientific law, mastering their craft. This helps them to not get too caught up in the ups and downs of their career. It is the work that matters, and in the end, these masters end up making more money and becoming more famous by cultivating the spirit. Steve Jobs personified this craftsman ethic. He inherited it from his father, a man who loved to build things with his hands, and the love of perfection for making things just right is an attitude he transferred to the design of the products for Apple. That's the master's goal, to make things well and to feel pride in it. Daily law: retain the craftsman's spirit. Keep in mind, the work is the only thing that matters. So, that's how you're supposed to be looking at your life. With the craftsman's eye. The work is what matters. Who you are is what matters. I've always had that attitude. And I've always had this thought, like, it kind of doesn't matter what you do in this life. What matters is who you are while you do it. So a lot of people like to see like the yardstick of success being what you do in this life. Like they look at the Steve Jobs or the Bill Gates or the Elon Musks or the Donald Trumps of this world, and they measure success by the things that these men have attained. But I've always thought of that as being not accurate. Ever since I was little, really. And I guess this has a lot to do with my schooling, because I was brought up in Christian schools, and the icon of, I guess you could say, the perfect human would be Jesus. Jesus he didn't attain anything in terms of a high position in life. Like he wasn't a king, and he wasn't like a rich man, and he didn't have all these things. It was who he was and the things he taught and the words he spoke that made him a master. People like Gandhi, you know, these are the people that I've always thought of as being more worthy of being, let's see, looked up to, I guess would be a better phrase, or the best phrase. I was gonna say worship in terms of like, because I had Jesus in my mind, but I don't think that's appropriate for like any other human. Because then I thought Gandhi, and I'm like, no, I don't think you should be worshiping Gandhi. I mean, you should strive to be like Gandhi, I guess, maybe, but I don't think worship is appropriate. So let's see, who do we have today? Who's a good example of somebody who loves the craft? Kobe. In terms of sports, because a lot of people like to idolize sports figures. Kobe's work ethic. which immediately brought LeBron into mind. That guy. You know, people who are masters at their craft, you tend to want to emulate them. And the first thing I see when I see people like LeBron, even though he's been a winner, but it's him that I have issue with. Like, you never see Kobe doing the things that LeBron does. Kobe would never do things like that. I've never seen Kobe flop the way LeBron flops, or complain the way LeBron complains. It's not what you do, it's not how many championships or games you win, it's who you are while you're doing it. Never seen Jordan behave the way LeBron behaves, or Magic, or Larry Bird. Those are the greats in terms of basketball, if you ask me. Those are the masters. Let me see, who else, aside from sports, who else could we take as an example as a master? Let me think. I don't know. You know, when it comes to being like a master, one of the greats, quote unquote, whatever it is, I don't see perfection as being one of the things that is required for you to attain that title. All right, going back to LeBron, he's definitely not perfect. Is he a master? All right, maybe out of sheer size and lack of adequate opposition, maybe you could call him a master at his craft. You know, all the whining, crybaby, and flopping aside, I guess you could call him a master. So let's forgive him for that and move on to another arena in life. I don't know. Robert Greene. I think, you know, in terms of authors, you know, contemporary authors, I think he would be a master in his craft, and especially in the type of books that he writes. Let me see, who else? I don't know. But all I do know is that these are all the qualities that the masters do have that made them masters. I think they applied them to their lives in general, and it just happened to seep out in their work. So it's not like they were like Steve Jobs, for example. He wasn't just a master at being, you know, an innovator when it came to Apple. He was innovative in the way he conducted his own life. You know, even in the end, when he was sick, if I believe this is accurate, he was looking for alternative means and methods of being healthy, to see if that might cure what ailed him. It may not have worked, but you know, he retained that mindset even to the end. And I think even all masters, you know, even in that page I just read right now, it even mentioned Steve Jobs' father. So even that's a nod to the fact that everybody who seems to reach master level at whatever task or skill or job or whatever position they hold, if they are looked at as a master, they still were influenced by somebody else that lit that fire, that little spark. It always comes from somebody else. And that again goes back to the standing on the shoulders of giants phrase. Everybody stands on the shoulders of giants. You know, everybody has the benefit of having the innovations that came before them at the tip of their, you know, they have it in the palm of their hands. You know, we have all this technology. We didn't invent it, but we have it now. And now we can use it to innovate even further. Right? That's the way it goes. We are able to use all the tools at our disposal that our forefathers forged for us to further forge the future in ways that they could never have thought of. And that's the gift that each generation gives to the next generation coming. Even if those gifts are mistakes. I see that also, and I think a lot of people like to ignore that part. There's all the mistakes, but that is all learning too. You have to remember, right? You have to fall while you're learning to stand and walk as a very young child, you know, as a baby. You have to crawl before you learn to walk. And even when you learn to walk, you got to stand up and try to find your balance, and you fall a lot of times before you actually get it. And I think that's the perfect metaphor for life. But people don't want to do the falling part. They see everybody else and just think they got it perfect, and they're trying to be that. That's not the way it goes. That was the daily page, and those are the thoughts I have on that. How could I dovetail this into what's happening in the world? Oh, I had seen. So I guess now that Iran looks like it's taken care of, and everybody's patting themselves on the back for that. I guess Turkey is next. It's just on to the next one. So they're still going to just keep going until all of the Middle East is under the thumb of the West, which I tend to shake my head at. You know, I live in America, and I love it here. But the way I think and the things that I believe, you know, karma plays a big role in how I approach the world. And there's two ways to view what's going on with the geopolitical events right now. So either this is karma that all the countries of the Middle East have accrued, and now this is what's happening to them, or this is just what's happening to them, and all the things in the Middle East are going to accrue karma for America in the future. I don't know. You know, I try to stay neutral. I'm not trying to pick a side. But I know I don't like bullies. And, you know, a lot of the people that are in this country, you know, they look towards America as something to strive for. And I understand, because a lot of these countries are still living like third world lives. And a lot of these countries are under very strict authoritarian governments. But that little voice in my head goes, you know, be careful what you wish for. You just might get it. And then I've said that at work, and people are like, well, what do you mean by that? And I'm like, all right, let's take Iran, for example. You know, they might look at America and, you know, even the general population might want to have what we have or be what we be in terms of the American lifestyle. And I understand that, but again, the little voice in my head goes, okay, be careful now, because now we're having to deal with men in the women's bathroom. And then part of me looks at their culture and, you know, their government, and maybe that's what they're seeing when they look at America, when they want to, you know, just pump the brakes, because, you know, however many years from now, Iran's going to have to be dealing with men in the women's bathroom. And with men wearing dresses. And with women wanting to have double mastectomies. I don't know. You know, be careful what you wish for. You just might get it. You just might get it in a way that you just weren't seeing coming. Just don't know. That's why I try not to force things to happen very, very often. Force something to happen, and then you never know what the ramifications of that force might bring. You know, I normally am the type of person that waits to the absolute last second to make a decision that I absolutely have to make. Because up until then, I don't really know what decision to make. I don't know which road to take. You know, it always seems like a fork in the road situation. All right, let's take my personal life as an example. I guess I have to, because that's what I was talking about. So in my previous life I was married, and I came to find after 12 years of marriage that I was being cheated on. And you know, I didn't really, you know, I have kids, 3 daughters. I didn't know what to do. It's like, what do I do with this now, this information? And I saw a fork in the road, because I had already met somebody. And towards the end of my marriage, I was already miserable. And it already seemed like it was over. And and finding out that I was being cheated on was just pretty much confirmation of that. So there was like that fork in the road. What do I do? And it was almost kind of like I was waiting for a sign. And lo and behold, the sign came. Like one night, that person I was married to didn't come home. She just didn't come home. She came home in the morning, changed, and went back to work. I was like, oh, okay. So as soon as she left, I was like, that was my sign. Packed up all my stuff, left. It's like I needed a little nudge. And that was it. Speaking of nudges, there's something called nudge theory that I found out about. And nudge theory is like it's like the science behind using all forms of informational influence to get people to act and do in ways they wouldn't normally act or do. I've always theorized about this, but I actually found out that it is a science. It was the science of nudge theory. The first time I ever thought about this was when pot became a cultural phenomenon in a way that it was just openly used and just pretty much everywhere, and all these collectives and pot shops started popping up. And looking back, I was like, oh, okay, I see how they laid the groundwork for this to be accepted. Because very quietly they had decriminalized it. They knocked it down to Schedule whatever. And even before it had become, you know, available through, you know, medical marijuana cards and stuff like that. Like way back in like the 90s, you know, when Dr. Dre became popular. You know, because before Dr. Dre became Dr. Dre, he was just a member of NWA. And they weren't really, you know, their lyrics, they may have mentioned pot here and there. But it wasn't like the main focus of what NWA was. And in going back even further, NWA was all about gang violence. And I don't want to say it caused a lot of gang violence back in the day, but it sure didn't help. It's not like they preached against gang violence. So Dr. Dre goes solo and drops his album called The Chronic. And the whole thing was just laced with marijuana, you know, it's called The Chronic. Right? And through Dr. Dre, we discover Snoop Dogg. So that's how Snoop Dogg's introduced into the public zeitgeist. You know, and he was just he would do. He was nothing but pot. You know, that's his whole thing. And it's like all these little seeds were being planted subconsciously in people's minds to nudge us towards social acceptance of marijuana. Because now it was time. It was time for it to be socially accepted. Not only because, you know, monetarily, it's a billion, if not $1 trillion crop. It's useful in very many ways. But also, it keeps that veil of... See, now that I'm not smoking pot anymore, and I have clarity of mind, I see how it keeps this, like... You know, if you ever walked into a room where people are smoking pot, you know, there's like this smoke in the air, right? That's literally what it does to your mind. It always keeps your mind under this, like, there's just this little haze of smoke that's keeping you from seeing clearly. And it does kind of intertwine its way into your life once you become addicted. And yes, you can become addicted to smoking pot. You can become addicted to anything. You become addicted to exercise. You can become addicted to your own political opinion. Addictions has nothing to do with the drug itself. Addiction is just basically a fancy word to use in place of habit. It's habit forming, you know? And that's what it was for me. I see it. You have your certain times of days when you smoke. You know, your certain places you can feel comfortable smoking, certain people you feel comfortable smoking with. It just becomes a habit. And after a while, after the fun goes away, once the fun of it is gone and all you're left with, all that's remaining is the habit, it becomes like... what's the best way to describe this? It's like it becomes your master and now you're the slave. You become a slave to it. I see it now, being on the other side of it, which is very interesting because you don't see it coming. That's the scary part. It's all fun and games until it becomes your ruler. And once it reaches that point, all the fun is gone. And mostly it's because, at least for me, and I think a lot of people would have to agree with this, mostly it's you're trying to avoid something that you're not dealing with. I know for me it was. I mean, because it feels good, right? Smoking, the effect of it feels good. But then you should ask yourself, why don't you just feel good normally? What's wrong that you're not feeling good normally without it? So that's the question I think most people are missing. If you need to smoke pot to feel good, that means you can't feel good on your own. That should worry you. That means there's something going on in your life mentally that you're ignoring. That you can't find that feel good feeling completely on your own. And that surprised me. Once I got some distance from it, like, I'm having just as much fun in life, and I feel just as good as I ever have not smoking pot now. And I just think it's because I had to go through some stuff emotionally and mentally. And I had to process all that through to find this place that I'm at now. I think it's hard for a lot of people to do that, because that means you have to look at yourself in the mirror. So really, a lot of people tend to think that all their problems and issues and emotional trauma and all that stuff it came from the outside, and they want to like point at a person or a circumstance or an issue outside of them that's making their lives the way they are. When the reality is, your life is the way it is because of you. There is no one and there's nothing to blame but you for why your life is the way it is. No one's making you feel a certain way. No one's making you do a certain thing. No one's making a behavior manifest other than you. That's what Jocko Willink would call extreme accountability. I am the cause of my own life. All this talk about generational trauma and all these things being handed down, and the law of cause and effect is real, but the only way to break that cause and effect cycle is for you to face it. Otherwise, you're nothing but a victim to it. The law of cause and effect, if it's ruling over your life, it's because you are avoiding being a cause yourself. And you're assuming the role of the effect. And that's the victim role. Once you actually look yourself in the mirror and you actually attain that mental mode of extreme accountability, once you do that, you are no longer in effect, and you are now in the position of being the cause of things. You are now making things happen in a way that will affect others. And that dovetails back into the page I read this morning, like Steve Jobs' father. He was a cause that had an effect on Steve Jobs. We're all doing that to a certain degree. We are all actually causes, but most of us are absent-mindedly causing people to be affected in ways that we are not intending. You have to live an intentional life in order for your causes to have the intended effect that you want. Otherwise, you're just doing this in such an absent-minded way that the effect you're having is negative. And that's dangerous. Not dangerous in like an evil, malicious way, but dangerous in like that you just weren't paying attention way. Right? You didn't see that stop sign, so that's why you hit that car. That kind of dangerous. You didn't intend to do it, but that was the effect of your inability to pay attention to what you're doing. So that's why I try to live a very intentional life. I watch every word I say. I don't do things that I wouldn't want people to do to me, The golden rule, I take that very serious. They call it a golden rule for a reason. You know, gold is very valuable. And to label something a golden rule, that's not just a turn of phrase. That phrase is that way for a reason. There's value in that rule. You know, if I could snap my fingers and everybody lived by the golden rule for one day, just one day, the whole world would change in a day. Just for the day, right? Imagine with all this technology, if we put out a PSA, public announcement, public service announcement, just for the day. You know, just drop the ego for a day and live by the golden rule. I wonder what would happen. That'd be very interesting. Very interesting social experiment. We have the technology to do it. That's what I would do. If I was in charge of all this, I would conduct grand scale social experiments with that type of thinking in mind. But no, let's bomb Iran. That's what people are doing. That's what the people in charge. That's how their minds work. Because really, it's not going to go away. Bombing Iran is not going to solve a thing. You could change the government, you could have regime change all you want. You're missing the point. It's not the regime that's the issue. It's not anything going on over there that's the issue. It's the inability to take extreme ownership and accountability for one's actions that are the issue. And this war that's going on over there, it's not political. For the first time I finally heard somebody say this. This is a spiritual battle that's going on. Really what's going on is this is all the major religions at war under the guise of political conflict. And there are extremes to every religion. Every religion has its extremes. You know, there are plenty of Muslims that, you know, Muslim families where the women aren't required to wear the hijab. That's the extreme. But that's what they want us to think all of Islam is the extreme. Right? There's sects of Judaism where the women can't show their hair, so they wear wigs. Look that up. I believe that's accurate. Even Christianity has its extremes. Right? The speaking in tongues and, you know, all that is, you know, a form of extreme when it comes to that kind of belief. Alright, here's my exit. Covered a lot of ground, talked about a lot of topics. Let's see. The daily page. Love the process. Love perfecting the process. And the journey of the process towards the outcome. The outcome isn't the goal. The process is the goal. Conduct your life in that way. Look at building yourself in that way, because you are always a work in progress. You were never a finished product. All these people out there with your egos, there's nothing perfect about you. Perfection isn't something that can be attained. It's only something that can be strived for. I think that's the message of the day. right? Strive to be a cause in a way that inspires people to be better. You know, don't point fingers in a way that's just finger pointing and telling people to not be or not do, or you know, you need to stop this or you need to correct that. That's not in there's no instruction there. You're not telling them what to do in lieu of what they're currently doing. And instead of telling them what to do, be the example that you want them to do. Right? That's the golden rule. Do unto others. Be that person that you prefer everybody else to be. Right? That's just the way I think things should be. I think, like I said, social experiment for a day. Everybody try it. See what happens. All right, I have arrived. Park this sucker. Okay, hopefully, by the grace of God, my gas makes it to the end of the week. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. Lights off. Turn that off. All right. Everybody have a great day. Put your best foot forward. Help others. Open doors for people. Say good morning. Always smile and nod at least. Be the change, right? Isn't that another one of those axioms? Be the change that you want to see in the world. I mean, you could be the opposite. You could just keep on being whatever the world is being. Is that what we want? Look where that's getting us. All right. I think I'm ready to go. Everybody have a great day. Do unto others. Let's go to work.